The chamber stretched 300 meters in every direction, carved from solid bedrock deep beneath the surface of Nexus Prime. Metal walkways crisscrossed the vast space, all leading toward the center where the artifact waited. It stood 20 meters tall, a structure of crystalline material that seemed to shift between states of matter. Sometimes it looked solid as diamond, other times it flowed like liquid mercury. The scientists had named it Project Origin, though they had no idea what it truly was or who had built it. The air hummed with tension. 47 different species had sent their finest warriors to this place. They stood in designated sections around the chamber, each group eyeing the others with barely concealed contempt. The Krathen occupied the northern platform, their massive forms covered in natural armor plating that had evolved over millions of years. Each one stood 3 meters tall with 4 arms ending in claws that could tear through starship hulls. They had conquered 12 systems through pure military might before joining the coalition. To the east, the Vexnar waited in absolute silence. They were smaller than most species, barely reaching 2 meters, but their reputation made up for their size. Assassins and shadow warriors, they had never lost a single war in their 6,000-year recorded history. Their skin shifted colors to match their surroundings, and their eyes could see in 17 different spectrums. When a Vexnar decided you were an enemy, you were already dead. The Threen Hive occupied the southern section. They moved as one organism, 50 bodies sharing a single consciousness. Their tactical abilities were legendary. They could coordinate attacks across entire star systems with perfect precision, each individual body acting as a cell in a greater military organism. Other species found them disturbing to watch, the way they all turned their heads in perfect unison, the way they spoke in perfectly synchronized voices. Dozens of other species filled the remaining spaces. The apex champions from the warrior clans of territories unknown. The Silicon Striders who had evolved on a high-gravity world and could crush steel with their bare hands. The quantum dancers who could predict enemy movements through mathematical probability. Every species present had earned their place through conquest, survival, or demonstrated military excellence. They had all come for the same reason. The Void Swarm was coming. 3 months ago, the first reports had arrived from the Outer Rim. Entire colonies going silent. Investigation teams finding nothing but empty buildings and ships drifting in space. Their crews vanished without a trace. Then the attacks began. A black mass of biomechanical creatures that moved through space like a living ocean, consuming everything in their path. They adapted to every weapon used against them, learned from every tactic, grew stronger with each victory. The Coalition's best military minds had run the projections. At current rate of advance, the Void Swarm would reach the core systems within 2 years. Within 5 years, every inhabited world in the galaxy would be consumed. They needed a miracle. They needed a weapon that the Swarm had never encountered before. Then the archaeological team on Nexus Prime had found it. Project Origin, the scanner, the ancient forerunner technology that promised salvation. Dr. Velthus moved through the crowd, his multiple limbs carrying data tablets and sensor equipment. He was the chief scientist assigned to Project Origin, a Novarian whose species had been studying ancient civilizations for 10,000 years. His people didn't produce warriors. They produced scholars and archaeologists, but even they understood that knowledge meant nothing if you were dead. "Attention all candidates," Velthus announced, his voice amplified through the chamber's speaker system. "We will now conduct test number 1847. Please observe safety protocols." On the central platform, a Krathen warlord stepped forward. His name was Gormash the Destroyer, and his reputation preceded him. 300 battles across 40 systems. He had personally killed a Void Swarm scout ship by tearing through its hull with his bare claws. If anyone deserved to be chosen by the ancient weapon, it was him. Gormash approached the scanner with confidence. The crystalline structure pulsed with inner light, patterns flowing across its surface like veins of luminescent blood. At its base, a panel had opened during the first test 3 weeks ago. It showed a simple handprint, sized for the forerunners who had built this place. The handprint glowed with soft blue light waiting. The Krathen placed his massive claw against the panel. The scanner's hum increased in pitch. Light flowed up from the base, racing along the crystalline structure's surface. It reached the apex in 3 seconds, then it turned red. A pulse of energy radiated outward from the scanner, not harmful but definitely a rejection. Gormash stumbled backward, his claws scraping against the metal platform. The red light faded, and the scanner returned to its dormant state. Test 1847, Velthus recorded into his tablet. Negative result. Candidate rejected, Gormash roared in frustration. This is meaningless. I am the greatest warrior of my generation. I have killed thousands. What more does this cursed machine want? No one had an answer. That was the problem. For 3 weeks, the scanner had rejected every candidate from every species. The strongest warriors, the smartest tacticians, the fastest killers, the most experienced veterans, all rejected. The scientists had run every test they could think of. The machine was functioning perfectly. It was actively scanning each candidate, analyzing them somehow. It simply found all of them lacking. The coalition leaders grew more desperate with each failure. The Void Swarm advanced closer every day. If they couldn't activate the ancient weapon, they would have to face the swarm with conventional forces. All projections showed that ending in total defeat. Velthus reviewed his notes from the excavation. The Forerunners had been the dominant civilization in this region of space 10,000 years ago. They had built structures that still stood when modern materials would have crumbled. They had created technology that current science couldn't even explain. Then they had vanished. No bodies, no records, no explanation. Just empty cities and artifacts like this one. The chamber doors opened with a heavy grinding sound. A new group entered, and immediate laughter rippled through the assembled warriors. The humans had arrived. Humanity was the Coalition's newest member species. They had discovered faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Their first contact with alien life had been a shock to everyone involved. The humans were weak by galactic standards. No natural armor, no claws or fangs, no poison or enhanced strength. They came from a gravity well that was considered light by most standards. Their technology was primitive, barely functional. The Coalition had accepted humanity's membership application mostly out of politeness. It seemed cruel to leave them unprotected when the Void Swarm came. The humans would be consumed like everyone else, but at least they could say they had tried to help. The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals, escorted by a Novarian diplomatic officer. They looked so small compared to the warrior species surrounding them. They wore simple military uniforms, gray and black with minimal decoration. Their leader was a female, which several species found unusual. Many cultures reserved warfare for males, though humans apparently didn't care about such distinctions. Are they serious? A Vexnar whispered to his companion. Do they actually believe their species can pilot the Forerunner weapon? Let them try, a Silicon Strider rumbled with amusement. They'll be rejected like everyone else. At least it will be quick. Dr. Velthus approached the human delegation with professional courtesy. Welcome. I am Chief Scientist Velthus. You've been briefed on the situation. The human leader nodded. Yes, sir. We understand we're to attempt interface with the Forerunner scanner. I'm Colonel Mitchell. These are my candidates. Velthus examined his tablet. According to protocol, each candidate will attempt in sequence. The scanner requires physical contact with the interface panel. Please warn your people that rejection can cause momentary disorientation. It's not harmful, but several candidates have fallen. Understood, Colonel Mitchell said. He turned to his people. You heard the man. Who's first? A large human male stepped forward. His name tag read Jackson. He had the build of someone who spent considerable time maintaining physical fitness, though by galactic standards he was still quite weak. He approached the scanner with visible nervousness. Jackson placed his hand on the panel. The light raced upward. 3 seconds later, red. Rejected. The second human tried. A male named Rodriguez. Rejected. The third. Rejected. The fourth. Rejected. The assembled aliens lost interest quickly. Of course, humans were being rejected. Everyone was being rejected. This was a waste of time. Some warriors began discussing their own failures, comparing notes on what the scanner might be looking for. Others simply waited for the humans to finish so they could try their own candidates again. Colonel Mitchell looked at his last candidate. Chen, you're up. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped forward. She was not impressive by any standard. Average height for a human, which made her small by galactic standards. Slim build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her face showed signs of sun exposure and hard living, but nothing remarkable. Her uniform had a combat engineer badge on the shoulder. She walked with a slight limp favoring her left leg. Chen approached the scanner without any of the confidence that previous candidates had shown. If anything, she looked uncomfortable being here. She glanced back at Colonel Mitchell, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Just like we briefed," Mitchell said. "Place your hand on the panel and wait." Chen took a breath and placed her palm against the interface. The scanner hummed. Light flowed upward from the base. 3 seconds passed. The light didn't turn red. It kept scanning. Patterns flowed across the crystalline surface, more complex than before. Colors shifted through the spectrum. Blue, green, yellow, violet. Colors that didn't have names in most languages. Velta stared at his instruments in shock. "That's impossible. It's never scanned for longer than 3 seconds before." The chamber fell silent. Every warrior species stopped their conversations and turned to watch. The human stood frozen at the scanner, her hand still pressed against the panel. Her eyes had gone wide and her body had gone rigid. "Should we pull her away?" Colonel Mitchell asked with concern in his voice. "No," Velta said quickly. "Don't interrupt the process. This is unprecedented." Images began to project from the scanner. Holographic displays filled the air around Chen, visible to everyone in the chamber. They showed scenes from her memories. A younger Chen running through destroyed buildings while explosions lit the sky. Chen in a military hospital, bandages covering burns. Chen standing at attention while receiving a medal. But her face showed no pride, only exhaustion. More memories played out. Chen dragging a wounded comrade through hostile territory. Chen working on damaged equipment while enemy fire struck nearby. Chen's combat unit being ambushed, ships exploding around her. Her surviving by pure luck or chance or something else. The scanner projected text in an ancient language that scrolled across holographic displays. Velthas's translation software struggled to keep up. Fragments appeared in Coalition Standard Language. Pattern analysis. Adaptive response to extreme adversity. Survival instinct beyond baseline. Psychological scarring indicates repeated exposure to mortality events. Subject has failed and continued. Subject has lost and persisted. Subject knows fear but acts regardless. The light from the scanner grew brighter. More colors appeared, shades that hurt to look at directly. The crystalline structure resonated with a deep tone that could be felt in the bones. Then words appeared in every language simultaneously, projected in letters 3 meters tall above the scanner. Compatible pattern recognized. Adaptive, resilient, scarred but unbroken. Species designation, humanity. Status, approved. The chamber erupted in chaos. Warriors from every species began shouting questions. How could a human be approved when their champions were rejected? What did the machine see in this unremarkable soldier? What did scarred but unbroken mean? Velthas ignored them all. His attention was fixed on the far end of the chamber where another structure had stood dormant since excavation. The Prometheus frame, the war machine that had been waiting alongside the scanner inert and dead for 10,000 years. It was activating. Lights flickered along its surface. Systems that had been cold and dark began to glow with power. The frame stood 30 meters tall, a humanoid war machine of Forerunner construction. Its armor plates shifted and reconfigured. Power cores that scientists had studied for weeks without understanding suddenly came online, humming with barely contained energy. The cockpit opened. A ramp extended downward toward the platform where Chen stood. She had finally broken contact with the scanner and was staring at the war machine with wide eyes and an expression that mixed awe with pure terror. A voice emanated from the Prometheus frame. It spoke in perfectly clear Coalition Standard Language, though the accent was strange, ancient. "Pilot identified, neural link prepared, approach and enter." Chen looked back at Colonel Mitchell. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, what do I do?" Mitchell stared at the war machine, then at Chen, then at the assembled alien warriors who all looked equally shocked. He cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Chen, you have your orders. The mission was to interface with Forerunner technology. I'd say you've succeeded. Now get in that machine and let's find out what the hell humanity just inherited." Chen swallowed hard. She looked at the massive war machine waiting for her, at the ramp leading into its heart. Every instinct probably told her to run. Instead, she squared her shoulders, adjusted her uniform, and began walking toward the Prometheus frame. Behind her, a Krathan warrior found his voice. "This cannot be. That human is nothing special. She's weak. She's damaged. Why would the Forerunners choose her?" Dr. Veltas looked at his instruments, reading data that flowed faster than he could comprehend. When he spoke, his voice held a note of revelation. Perhaps that's exactly why they chose her. Sarah Chen climbed the ramp with careful steps. Her injured leg ached from the climb, a reminder of the ambush that had nearly killed her 2 years ago. The metal beneath her boots felt warm, almost alive. The Prometheus frame towered around her. 30 meters of ancient technology that should not be functioning but somehow was. Every scientist in the chamber had tried for weeks to activate this machine. All they had managed to do was identify it as a war platform. Now it had turned itself on for her. She reached the top of the ramp where the cockpit waited. The interior glowed with soft blue light. A seat had configured itself, adjusting to proportions that would fit a human body. Displays surrounded it, showing information in languages that shifted and changed as she watched, eventually settling into English. Her native language. The machine was adapting to her. Sarah hesitated at the threshold. Behind her, thousands of eyes watched from below. The greatest warriors in the galaxy were waiting to see what would happen when an unremarkable human combat engineer climbed into a Forerunner war machine. She wanted to turn around, to tell them this was a mistake, that she was nobody special. But orders were orders, and more than that, something in her chest told her to step forward. She entered the cockpit. The moment her boots crossed the threshold, the ramp retracted. The cockpit sealed behind her with a sound like a whisper. Sarah stood alone in the confined space, surrounded by controls and displays that pulsed with inner light. The seat waited directly ahead. "Please sit," the machine's voice said. It sounded different now, less formal, almost gentle. "Neural interface requires physical contact with command thrown." Sarah moved to the seat and lowered herself into it. The material conformed to her body immediately, supporting her in perfect comfort. She had expected something cold and mechanical. Instead, it felt like being held by something that cared about her well-being. "Warning," the voice continued. "Neural link establishment may cause temporary disorientation. Memory access required for synchronization. Do you consent to proceed?" Sarah gripped the armrests. Her hands were shaking. She had faced enemy fire, survived explosions, watched friends die. Why was she more afraid now than she had been in any of those moments? Because those were familiar terrors. This was something completely unknown. "I consent," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Metal contacts extended from the headrest and touched the back of her skull. There was no pain, just a sensation of cold spreading through her head. Then the world disappeared. Sarah found herself standing in darkness. Not the darkness of a room with no light, but the darkness of a space that existed outside of normal reality. Gradually, light appeared. Not from any source, but as if the darkness itself was brightening. She stood in a vast library, shelves stretched in every direction, rising higher than she could see, filled with crystalline objects that pulsed with stored information. This was not a physical place. This was inside the Prometheus frame's memory core. She was inside the machine's mind. "Hello, Sarah Chen." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. A figure materialized in front of her, coalescing from light and data. It took the form of a tall humanoid, vaguely resembling the Forerunners from the historical records. But it was clearly not real, just an interface. A way for the artificial intelligence to communicate with her. "What is this place?" Sarah asked. "This is my consciousness," the AI replied. "I am the Prometheus frame's control intelligence. I have waited 10,000 years for a pilot. You are the first to be approved by the scanner. Why me? I'm nobody. There are warriors down there who have conquered star systems. I'm just an engineer who got lucky enough to survive a few fights." The AI tilted its head. "That is precisely why you were chosen. Come, let me show you." The library dissolved. Sarah found herself standing on a planet she didn't recognize. Cities stretched to the horizon, built from materials that gleamed like pearl and silver. Ships moved through the sky in perfect formation. Everything was orderly, efficient, beautiful. This was the Forerunner civilization at its height, the AI explained. "We ruled this region of space for 50,000 years. Our technology was unmatched. Our military had never known defeat. We believed ourselves invincible." The scene shifted. The same cities, but now they burned. Black masses moved through the streets, consuming everything they touched. Ships fell from the sky in flames. The Forerunners fought back with weapons that tore holes in reality itself. But the black masses kept coming, kept adapting, kept growing. The Void Swarm, Sarah whispered. Yes, though it had a different designation then. We threw everything at it. Our strongest warriors, our most powerful weapons, our greatest tactical minds. None of it mattered. The swarm learned from every attack. It adapted to every strategy. It consumed our strength and used it against us. The scene shifted again. Sarah saw Forerunner scientists working frantically on something. The Prometheus frame, the scanner. Project Origin. We realized our mistake too late, the AI continued. We had spent 50,000 years becoming the greatest military power in the galaxy. We knew only victory. We had forgotten how to lose. We had forgotten how to adapt to defeat. When the swarm proved stronger than us, we had no response. Our warriors chose death in glorious battle rather than retreat. Our leaders refused to acknowledge that we were losing. Pride killed us. Sarah watched as the Forerunner civilization collapsed, not destroyed entirely but scattered, broken, forced to evacuate their territory and flee to distant parts of the galaxy. Before we left, we created Project Origin, the scanner and the Prometheus frame. We programmed it to search for a specific type of pilot, not the strongest, not the most skilled, but someone who understood survival, someone who had faced defeat and continued, someone who carried scars. The scene changed to show Sarah's own memories. She saw herself as a child, living in the poverty zones of old Detroit, saw herself joining the military because it was the only way out, saw her first combat deployment, the terror and chaos of it, saw the ambush that killed her entire unit except for her. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. This was her life, displayed for examination. You have failed, the AI stated. It wasn't cruel, just factual. You failed to save your unit. You failed to prevent civilian casualties during the pirate raid on Colony 7. You failed to stop the reactor breach on Firebase Titan. You carry these failures with you. They weigh on you constantly. I know, Sarah said quietly. She had never needed a reminder of her failures. They haunted her dreams. But you did not stop. After each failure, you continued. After each loss, you adapted. You learned. You found new ways to survive. This is what the scanner was looking for. Not perfection. Not victory, but resilience. The AI gestured and Sarah saw other species warriors. She saw Gormash the Destroyer, charging into battle without fear, winning through pure strength. She saw Vexnar assassins executing perfect kills with flawless precision. She saw Threen hive minds coordinating attacks with mathematical perfection. All of them are excellent warriors, the AI said. All of them would have been approved by my creators during the height of the Forerunner civilization. But we are not at our height. We are trying to survive against an enemy that cannot be defeated through strength alone. For that, we need a pilot who understands that winning and surviving are not the same thing. The scene dissolved and Sarah found herself back in the library. The AI stood before her, waiting. I still don't understand, Sarah admitted. How does any of this help? The swarm is stronger than the Forerunners were. What can one human in an ancient war machine possibly do? The Prometheus frame is not just a weapon, the AI explained. It is an adaptive system. It learns from its pilot. It grows based on their choices. The Forerunners designed it to be piloted by someone who could think beyond conventional warfare, someone who could improvise, adapt, survive. You have spent your entire life learning those skills. By failing repeatedly. By surviving repeatedly, the AI corrected. There is a difference. Every warrior species in the galaxy practices warfare as an art. They have codes of honor, traditions, proper ways to fight. Humans have only been in space for 50 years. You have no traditions yet. You fight however you need to fight to survive. That flexibility is what we need. Sarah wanted to argue, but she found she couldn't. She thought about her career, the battles she had survived. She had never won through superior strength or skill. She won through stubbornness, through refusing to accept that a situation was impossible, through finding angles nobody else had considered. She survived through cheating, improvising, and being too stupid or too stubborn to know when she was supposed to give up. What happens now? She asked. Now we synchronize. I will share my capabilities with you. You will share your instincts with me. We will become one operational unit. The process is not pleasant. You will experience sensory input that human neurology was not designed to process. You will feel my weapon systems as extensions of your body. You will perceive threats across multiple spectrums simultaneously. It will be overwhelming. Will it hurt? Yes. Sarah closed her eyes, took a breath. She thought about her unit, the friends she had lost. She thought about the colonies the Void Swarm had consumed. She thought about Earth, about her family there, about the billions of humans who had no idea an existential threat was coming for them. "Do it," she said. The AI reached forward and touched her forehead. Reality exploded. Sarah's consciousness expanded beyond her body. She could feel the Prometheus frame as if it were her own flesh. The armor plating was her skin. The power core was her heart. The weapon systems were her hands. She could sense everything in the chamber below. She could count the heartbeats of every creature present. She could analyze the structural integrity of the walls. She could detect power signatures from equipment scattered throughout the facility. Information flooded her mind faster than she could process. Threat assessments, tactical analyses, energy readings, material compositions, mathematical projections. It was too much. Way too much. Her human brain couldn't handle this volume of data. She felt herself drowning in it, losing her sense of self, becoming just another input stream in the machine's vast consciousness. No, she was Sarah Chen. She was human. She was a survivor. She had made it through things that should have killed her. She would make it through this. Sarah focused on her breathing, in, out, just like the meditation exercises they taught in basic training. In, out, one breath at a time. She couldn't process all the information at once, but she didn't need to. She just needed to find her center. The flood of data began to organize itself. Her mind adapted, finding patterns, creating filters. Information sorted itself into categories. Threat analysis, resource management, tactical options. She could still access everything, but now it didn't overwhelm her. It was just available when she needed it. "Good," the AI said, and Sarah realized it was speaking directly into her thoughts now. "You are adapting. This is faster than expected. Most Forerunner pilots required days to reach this level of synchronization. You achieved it in minutes." Human stubbornness, Sarah thought back. We're good at forcing ourselves to adapt to terrible situations. Indeed. Neural link is now stable. We are ready for activation. Shall we introduce ourselves to the observers? Sarah opened her eyes. She was back in the cockpit, but now she could see through the Prometheus frame's sensors as easily as through her own eyes. She could perceive the chamber in ways her human senses never could. She saw the electromagnetic fields, heard radio frequencies, felt the minute vibrations in the structure around her. She stood up. The Prometheus frame stood with her. 30 meters of Forerunner war machine rising to its full height in perfect synchronization with her movements. In the chamber below, species from across the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the ancient weapon moved for the first time in 10,000 years. The Prometheus frame took one step forward, then another. Each movement was smooth and controlled despite the massive size. Sarah raised one arm. The frame raised its massive limb in response. She flexed her fingers. The frame's hand, larger than a transport shuttle, mimicked the gesture perfectly. "Neural link established," she said aloud. Her voice transmitted through the frame's external speakers. It boomed through the chamber. "Synchronization complete. Prometheus frame is operational." Dr. Velta stared at his instruments with all four of his eyes. His translator was working overtime trying to keep up with the data streaming from the frame. Impossible. The power readings alone should require a reactor the size of a small moon. Where is it drawing this much energy from? The AI answered directly, broadcasting to all receivers in the chamber. 0-point energy extraction from quantum vacuum. Forerunner standard power generation. Current output is at minimal operational levels. Minimal? A Silicon Strider engineer whispered in awe. That's enough power to vaporize a continent. Correct, the AI confirmed. Full combat capability requires substantially more output. Do not be alarmed. Safety protocols are active. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, his face showing a mixture of pride and concern. Lieutenant Chen, report. Are you in control? Sarah processed the question. Was she in control? She was merged with an artificial intelligence 10,000 years old, piloting a war machine of incomprehensible power. But yes, she was still herself. Still human. Still Sarah Chen. Yes, sir, she responded. I'm in control. It's strange, but manageable. Can you do anything with that thing? Sarah smiled inside the cockpit. The gesture transmitted through the frame somehow, and its optical sensors brightened in what might have been interpreted as a smile. Sir, I think we're about to find out exactly what humanity just inherited. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Felthus looked at his emergency display. his expression shifting from wonder to horror. "We have a problem," he announced. "Long-range sensors have detected incoming void swarm elements. A scout force, approximately 300 biomechanical units. They're heading directly for Nexus Prime. Time to arrival?" Colonel Mitchell demanded. 4 hours. Maybe less. The chamber erupted in shouting. Warriors from every species began arguing about defensive positions, evacuation protocols, whether they should fight or flee. The void swarm had found them faster than anyone had projected. Sarah stood in the Prometheus frame, feeling its power humming through her borrowed body. 4 hours. 4 hours until her first real test. She had been approved by the scanner. She had synchronized with the AI, but she had never actually fought in this machine. She had no training, no practice, no preparation. She thought about her old unit, the ones who hadn't survived the ambush. She thought about all the times she had been thrown into situations she wasn't ready for, and had somehow made it through anyway. "Looks like we're doing this the human way," she muttered. "The human way?" the AI inquired. "Figure it out as we go and hope we don't die." The AI processed this for a moment. Then, surprisingly, it responded with what might have been amusement. "I believe I am beginning to understand why the scanner chose you." "Very well, pilot. Let us hope together." The Prometheus frame stood on the surface of Nexus Prime, armor gleaming under the light of 3 suns. Sarah had piloted it up through the facility's massive cargo elevator, the only exit large enough to accommodate the war machine's size. Around her, the coalition forces scrambled to prepare defensive positions. Ships launched from the military spaceport, weapons systems powered up, shields activated across the entire installation. Sarah could sense all of it through the frame's sensors. She felt the electromagnetic signatures of charging weapons, heard the radio chatter of commanders coordinating their forces, saw the heat blooms from launching vessels. The amount of information would have paralyzed her human brain, but the neural link helped her process it all without being overwhelmed. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the communication channel. "You're to remain in reserve until we assess the situation. We don't know what that frame can do yet. Let the experienced forces engage first." Sarah understood the logic. She was piloting ancient technology that nobody understood, including herself. But something in her disagreed. The AI had been waiting 10,000 years for a pilot. It had rejected every warrior from every species. Then it had chosen her, a human combat engineer with a record of barely surviving impossible situations. That choice meant something. "The frame was built to fight the void swarm," Sarah responded. "That's literally what it was designed for. Keeping it in reserve seems like a waste." "That's an order, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir." Sarah settled the Prometheus frame into a kneeling position behind the main defensive line. The coalition forces arranged themselves in textbook formation. Krathan warriors in heavy armor formed the front line, their natural armor plating enhanced with energy shields. Vexnar forces positioned themselves in the high ground, their adaptive camouflage making them nearly invisible. Threen Hive units coordinated their fields of fire with mathematical precision. Silicon Striders anchored key positions with their immovable bulk. It was an impressive display of military coordination. These species had been waging war for thousands of years. They knew what they were doing. Sarah was the newcomer here. Humanity had been in space for only 5 decades. Maybe Mitchell was right to keep her in reserve. "Your colonel is making a mistake," the AI commented in her mind. "He's following doctrine," Sarah replied mentally. "Hold your strongest assets in reserve until you understand the battlefield situation. The void swarm does not follow doctrine. That is what makes it dangerous. Every conventional military response plays to its strengths." "What do you mean?" The AI projected tactical data directly into her consciousness. Sarah saw simulations of Forerunner battles against the swarm. She watched as perfect military formations were systematically dismantled. The swarm adapted to energy weapons, so the Forerunners switched to kinetic. The swarm adapted to kinetic weapons, so the Forerunners used exotic matter. The swarm adapted to everything. "The void swarm is not a military force," the AI explained. "It is an evolutionary system. Every attack teaches it. Every defense shows it weaknesses to exploit. Your coalition is preparing to fight a conventional battle. This will only make the swarm stronger. So what should we do? What humans do best. Improvise." Before Sarah could respond, alarms shrieked across all channels. The void swarm had arrived. They appeared at the edge of sensor range like a black stain spreading across space. 300 biomechanical entities, each one unique. Some resembled ships with organic components grafted onto metal frames. Others looked like they had once been living creatures converted into weapons. They moved with eerie coordination, not like a military fleet but like a school of predatory fish. The Coalition fleet engaged at maximum range. Missiles streaked across the void. Energy beams lanced out from warships. The Void Swarm's formations scattered and reformed, avoiding the worst of the barrage. Some units were destroyed, exploding in bursts of organic matter and shrapnel, but most adapted, their hulls shifting and changing, developing resistance to the weapons being used against them. Defensive batteries, fire at will, the Coalition commander ordered. Ground-based weapons opened up, particle cannons, railguns, plasma mortars. The sky filled with fire as projectiles and energy beams reached toward the descending swarm. Sarah watched through the frame's sensors, seeing the battle in multiple spectrums simultaneously. She saw the swarm adapt in real time. Armor plating thickened, shields manifested, countermeasures deployed. A Krathan battlecruiser took a direct hit from a cluster of swarm units. They latched onto its hull like parasites, tearing through armor with mandibles that pulsed with stolen energy technology. The battlecruiser's crew fought back, but the swarm units were learning their weapon frequencies, adapting their defenses with each exchange. All units switched to rotating frequency modulation, a Vexnar tactical officer commanded. Don't let them lock onto a single signature. It was smart tactical thinking. It bought them time, but Sarah could see the swarm adapting even to that. They weren't just learning individual weapon signatures. They were learning the concept of frequency rotation itself. They're learning too fast, she whispered. Yes, the AI confirmed. This is what destroyed my creators. Superior technology means nothing if your enemy can simply absorb and counter it. The Forerunners kept escalating, kept throwing more powerful weapons at the problem. The swarm kept adapting. Eventually, the Forerunners ran out of escalations. Sarah watched as more Coalition ships fell. A Threen vessel. Perfectly coordinated tactical movements rendered useless when swarm units predicted and countered every maneuver. A Silicon Strider heavy cruiser, its thick armor penetrated by biomechanical weapons that had evolved specifically to counter its defenses. The swarm was winning. Not through overwhelming force, but through adaptation. Every second of combat made them more effective. Lieutenant Chen, Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled with static. He was aboard one of the command ships. I'm moving you to active status. We need everything we've got. Engage at your discretion. Understood. Engaging. Sarah stood the Prometheus frame to its full height. The machine towered over the battlefield, 30 meters of Forerunner engineering rising like an ancient god. Every sensor focused on the swarm. Every weapon system armed itself. What weapons do we have? Sarah asked the AI. All of them. The frame's arms reconfigured. Weapon ports opened along its chassis. Energy built up in ways Sarah could feel through the neural link. It was like flexing muscles she didn't know she had. I recommend against using maximum firepower, the AI advised. Why? I thought this thing was built to fight the swarm. It was. But not through raw destruction. That is what the Forerunners tried. It failed. We must be smarter. Sarah processed this. The AI was right. She had watched the swarm adapt to everything the Coalition threw at them. More firepower would just give them more to adapt to. She needed to think differently. She remembered her training as a combat engineer. The lessons weren't about destroying the enemy. They were about controlling the battlefield, about using the environment, about making the enemy fight on your terms rather than theirs. Can you control local gravity? Sarah asked. Yes, localized gravitational manipulation is well within operational parameters. Can you create spatial distortions? Yes, the frame's engines can manipulate space-time on a tactical scale. Can you generate electromagnetic interference patterns? Yes, broad-spectrum jamming is available. Sarah smiled. She wasn't going to fight the swarm directly. She was going to make the battlefield itself unmanageable for them. Do it, all of it. Turn this entire combat zone into chaos. The Prometheus frame raised both arms. Gravity inverted in a sphere 3 kilometers wide. Swarm units suddenly found themselves pushed in random directions. Their adapted propulsion systems useless against constantly shifting gravitational vectors. Ships collided with each other. Formations broke apart. Coordinated attacks scattered. Next, Sarah triggered the spatial distortions. Space itself bent and twisted in localized areas. Swarm units trying to target coalition ships found their weapons firing into warped space, missing by kilometers. Some units fell into temporary spatial folds and disappeared, their adaptive navigation completely confused. Then came the electromagnetic interference. The frame broadcasted across every frequency simultaneously, creating a wall of noise that jammed sensors, disrupted communications, and overloaded the swarm's collective coordination. They couldn't adapt to random noise because there was no pattern to learn. The battlefield descended into absolute chaos. Coalition ships, warned by Sarah's broadcast, pulled back and switched to visual targeting and manual coordination. The swarm, dependent on their collective consciousness and adaptive sensors, floundered. They tried to adapt, but every time they began to adjust, Sarah changed the parameters. She wasn't fighting them. She was making them fight the environment itself. "This is working," the AI observed with what sounded like surprise. In 10,000 years of simulation, no Forerunner pilot ever attempted this approach. "Because Forerunner pilots were warriors," Sarah replied, maintaining the chaotic field while advancing toward concentrations of swarm units. "I'm an engineer. I don't fight fair. I make the other guy's weapons stop working and then kick them while they're confused." A cluster of swarm units tried to overwhelm her position. Sarah didn't shoot them. Instead, she reversed gravity directly beneath them, launching them into space on unpredictable vectors. Another group adapted to the gravity shifts and tried to close in. Sarah created a spatial fold that twisted their trajectory into a collision course with an asteroid fragment. The swarm was learning, but they were learning chaos. And chaos, by definition, couldn't be predicted or countered. Colonel Mitchell's voice came through, stunned. "Lieutenant Chen, what the hell are you doing? I've never seen anything like this." "Cheating, sir. Using every unfair advantage I can think of. The swarm adapts to weapons, so I'm not using weapons. I'm making physics itself the enemy. It's working. Coalition forces are regaining ground. The swarm is in disarray." Sarah could see it through her sensors. The coalition fleet was rallying, pressing their advantage. Swarm units, unable to adapt to random environmental chaos, were being destroyed by conventional weapons. Their adaptation cycle was broken because there was nothing consistent to adapt to. But something felt wrong. "This is too easy," Sarah said aloud. "The AI told me the swarm destroyed the Forerunner civilization. But this is just a scout force and we're beating them." "You are beating them," the AI corrected, "because you are doing something unexpected." "But you are correct. This is a scout force. Its purpose is not to conquer. Its purpose is to learn." The words hit Sarah like cold water. "It's studying us." "Yes, even as you defeat these units, the swarm's collective consciousness is recording your tactics. Every battlefield choice you make becomes data for future encounters. You are winning this battle, but the next one will be harder. The swarm will adapt to chaos itself." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She was using her best tricks, her most creative tactics, and the swarm was learning from all of it. She was winning the battle but potentially losing the war. Around her, coalition forces celebrated as the last swarm units were destroyed. Ships that had pulled back now returned, cheering over communication channels. Warriors on the ground raised their weapons in victory salutes. They had won their first major engagement against the Void Swarm. But Sarah stood in the Prometheus frame, staring at the debris field, and understood the horrible truth. The swarm had wanted them to win. It had sent a small enough force to be defeated, because the real goal was information gathering. They had been fighting a test, not a battle. "How long until the main force arrives?" Sarah asked quietly. The AI ran calculations. "Based on swarm movement patterns, the main fleet will arrive within 3 weeks. It will be exponentially larger than this scout force, and it will have adapted to everything we did here today. So we just made things worse. Perhaps. Or perhaps we learned something valuable as well." "What's that?" "That the swarm can be beaten. You proved that chaos and unpredictability can break their adaptation cycle. The challenge now is to find ways to be chaotic that even the swarm cannot predict. Ways to be unpredictable enough to stay ahead of their learning curve." Sarah thought about that, about what it meant to fight an enemy that learned from every encounter, an enemy that grew stronger from every battle. How did you fight something that adapted to everything? The answer came to her suddenly. You didn't fight the same way twice. You never used the same tactic twice. You constantly innovated, constantly changed, constantly evolved faster than your enemy could adapt. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was very, very human. Humanity had survived on Earth by being the most adaptable species on the planet. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most specialized, but the most able to change, to learn, to try new approaches when old ones failed. Every human alive was descended from ancestors who had survived ice ages, diseases, predators, and disasters by being flexible enough to change. Maybe that was what the scanner had seen in her. Not strength or skill, but the capacity to keep changing, keep adapting, keep finding new angles. The swarm was an evolutionary system. It adapted to threats. But humans were an evolutionary system too. They adapted to everything. This wasn't going to be a conventional war. It was going to be an adaptation race. The swarm versus humanity. And for the first time since climbing into the Prometheus frame, Sarah felt something other than fear. She felt ready. 3 weeks passed faster than Sarah thought possible. The coalition used every minute to prepare for the coming storm. Ships from across 47 systems converged on Nexus Prime, bringing warriors weapons and whatever hope they could muster. The victory against the swarm's scout force had given them confidence. Sarah wished she could share it. She spent the weeks training with the Prometheus frame, learning its capabilities through trial and error. The AI was patient, teaching her weapon systems, defensive measures, and tactical options that went far beyond anything human engineers had dreamed of. But every night, Sarah lay awake in her quarters thinking about the same problem. The swarm would return adapted to everything she had done. Her chaos tactics would only work once. She needed new approaches, different ideas, ways to fight that even she couldn't predict in advance. The Coalition Command Center buzzed with activity as species representatives argued over strategy. Sarah stood at the edge of the room, the Prometheus frame parked outside in standby mode, its consciousness still linked to hers through the neural interface. She could hear the AI's thoughts in the back of her mind like a constant companion. Admiral Kresh, a Krathan with scars covering half his face, stood at the tactical display. "We'll arrange our fleet in standard defensive formation. Maximize overlapping fields of fire. Let them come to us where we're strongest." "That won't work," Sarah said quietly. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. She was still just a lieutenant, speaking up in a room full of admirals and generals and warlords who had been fighting wars since before humanity discovered fire. Admiral Kresh's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Explain yourself, human." Sarah stepped forward to the tactical display. "The swarm has seen standard defensive formations. They've already adapted to them across multiple encounters. If we do what they expect, we lose. What do you suggest? Chaos tactics like you used before?" A Vexnar commander's voice dripped with skepticism. "The swarm will have adapted to those as well. Not chaos tactics. Something else." Sarah manipulated the display, calling up her own simulations. She had spent weeks working on this with the AI's help. The swarm adapts to threats and strategies. But what if we don't have a strategy? What if every ship, every unit, every weapon system operates independently with no overall coordination? The room erupted in objections. "That's madness," Kresh roared. "Military forces require coordination. Without it, we're just a mob." "Exactly," Sarah said. "We become unpredictable. The swarm can't adapt to our strategy if we don't have one. Each commander makes their own decisions in the moment. No patterns, no predictable responses." A Threen representative spoke up, all 50 of its bodies in perfect synchronization. "This violates every principle of military doctrine developed over 10,000 years of warfare. Coordination is what separates organized forces from rabble. And the swarm has defeated 10,000 years of military doctrine," Sarah countered. "They've seen every pattern, every tactic, every coordinated response. They know how militaries think because militaries all think the same way. We need to fight like we've never fought before." Colonel Mitchell, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "You're asking species who have built their entire military traditions around honor, coordination, and proven tactics to abandon everything they know." "That's not a small ask, Lieutenant." "I know, sir, but the swarm is an existential threat. If we fight them the way they expect, we die. If we fight them in a way even we can't predict, maybe we survive." A quantum dancer tactical officer raised a concern. "How does one fight without prediction?" "We calculate probability trees to determine optimal strategies. Without coordination, how do we avoid friendly fire? How do we maintain supply lines? How do we communicate objectives?" Sarah had thought about these problems for weeks. Friendly fire avoidance through simple rules engagement. Don't shoot anything that's shooting at the swarm. Supply lines stay standard, but delivery timing is randomized. Objectives are communicated, but methods are left to individual commanders. It's insane, Admiral Kresh muttered. But he was looking at the tactical display with less certainty now. It goes against everything we know. Everything you know has failed against the swarm, Sarah said gently. The Forerunners had the most advanced military in galactic history. It wasn't enough. We need something different. The room fell into debate. Some supported the idea. Others rejected it outright. Species who had built their entire cultures around military honor struggled with the concept of abandoning coordination. Engineers worried about the logistics. Tacticians saw only chaos and disaster. Finally, Dr. Velthos spoke up. Perhaps we should remember why Project Origin chose a human. The scanner rejected every warrior from every established military tradition. It approved Lieutenant Chen precisely because she represents something different. Her species has no established space warfare doctrine. They improvise. They adapt. Perhaps that is exactly what we need. Admiral Kresh stared at Sarah for a long moment. You're asking us to bet our civilizations on an untested theory, proposed by a species that has been in space for less than one human lifetime. Yes, sir. I am. That's either brilliant or suicidal. In my experience, sir, those two things aren't as different as people think. Kresh's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Very well. I'll authorize partial implementation. Half our forces will follow traditional coordination. The other half will operate under your independent command doctrine. If your approach fails, we'll still have organized forces to fall back on. It wasn't everything Sarah wanted, but it was something. Thank you, Admiral. The meeting dissolved into planning sessions. Commanders who agreed to try independent operations gathered to discuss implementation. Those who preferred traditional approaches coordinated their defensive formations. The coalition was splitting its strategy, hedging its bets. Sarah returned to the Prometheus frame, settling into the cockpit and re-establishing full neural link. The AI's presence flooded her consciousness. An interesting gamble, the AI observed. You've convinced half the coalition to abandon military doctrine. If this fails, the blame will fall entirely on you. I know, but if I do nothing and they follow traditional tactics, they'll die anyway. At least this way we're trying something different. True. I have analyzed your independent operations concept. It has merit. The swarm's adaptive algorithms are built to recognize and counter patterns. Random individual actions would be significantly harder to predict and counter. You sound surprised that it might work. I am processing uncertainty. It is an unusual sensation. The Forerunners did not design me to experience doubt. Sarah smiled. Welcome to being human. We live with doubt every day. Alarms began blaring across all channels. Sarah's consciousness expanded through the framed sensors, reaching into space. At the edge of the system, space itself seemed to tear open. The void swarm had arrived. This was no scout force. The fleet that emerged from the void numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Biomechanical monstrosities that defied categorization, ships the size of moons, swarms of smaller units that moved like schools of fish, organic weapons platforms that pulsed with stolen technology from a dozen different civilizations. Sarah felt fear try to overwhelm her. This was impossible. There were too many. The coalition fleet was outnumbered 100 to 1. Visual on the swarm is deceiving, the AI noted calmly. Many of those units are support organisms. Approximately 40% of their force consists of adaptation matrices and processing nodes. They brought their evolutionary infrastructure with them. They intend to adapt in real time during the battle. Can we target those nodes? Yes, but they will be heavily defended, and they will adapt their defenses as we attack them. Sarah watched as the coalition fleet moved into position, half in coordinated formations, half in scattered independent configurations. It looked messy and wrong to her eye, which made sense. It was supposed to look wrong. Wrong meant unpredictable. All forces, this is Admiral Kresh. The Void Swarm has arrived in overwhelming numbers. They will try to destroy us. They will try to adapt to us. We will not make it easy for them. Fight with honor. Fight with cunning. Fight with everything you have. This is where we make our stand. The swarm fleet advanced like a living tsunami, black masses spreading across space. The coalition forces that had chosen traditional coordination moved in perfect formation, their weapon systems synchronized. The swarm met them with equally coordinated responses, having learned from thousands of previous encounters with conventional military forces. But the independent operators were different. A Vexnar cruiser didn't wait for coordination orders. Its captain simply chose an angle of attack that felt right and engaged. A Krathan battleship didn't follow a formation. It charged directly at a cluster of swarm units, weapons firing at random intervals. 3 vessels abandoned their perfect synchronization, each 50-body unit making its own tactical decisions. The result was chaos. The swarm's adaptation algorithm struggled. They could counter the coordinated forces easily, but the independent operators kept doing unexpected things. A Silicon Strider captain decided to ram his vessel into a swarm node, sacrificing his ship but destroying a valuable target. A Quantum Dancer vessel used its engines in reverse at full power, creating a gravitational anomaly that disrupted nearby swarm formations. Individual commanders made choices that no computer algorithm could predict because they were based on intuition, emotion, split-second decisions, and sometimes just luck. Sarah launched the Prometheus frame into the battle. This time she didn't use any of the tactics from before. No gravity manipulation, no spatial distortion. She simply engaged with conventional weapons, but she kept changing them. Energy beams for 3 seconds, then switched to kinetic slugs. Missiles for 5 seconds, then switched to plasma bursts. Never the same pattern twice. Never predictable. The swarm units trying to engage her kept adapting to the wrong thing. They developed energy shields just as she switched to kinetics. They hardened their armor just as she switched to exotic matter weapons. They were always one step behind because she wasn't following any plan, not even her own. "This is madness," a Krathan captain shouted over the open channel. "We're fighting with no coordination." "I know," his executive officer responded. "It's working." And it was working. The independent operators were inflicting disproportionate damage compared to the coordinated forces. The swarm could predict and counter traditional military tactics with ease, but random individual choices were proving much harder to adapt to. But the swarm had numbers. Massive, overwhelming numbers. For every unit the coalition destroyed, 10 more pressed forward. Coalition ships were falling despite their tactical advantages. The math was simple and brutal. Eventually, quantity would overcome quality. Sarah pushed the Prometheus frame deeper into the battle, targeting swarm processing nodes. The AI helped her identify them through the chaos. She destroyed one, then another, disrupting the swarm's ability to coordinate its adaptation response. But there were too many. For every node she destroyed, 3 more moved into position. A swarm superorganism, something massive and ancient, pushed toward the coalition's defensive line. It had adapted to everything being thrown at it. Shields layered upon shields, armor that regenerated, weapons that could fire across multiple spectrums simultaneously. It was a fortress and a weapon combined, something that had survived 1,000 battles. Sarah knew conventional weapons wouldn't work. The superorganism had adapted to everything, so she did something completely unconventional. She stopped fighting it. Instead, she flew the Prometheus frame directly at it, weapons silent, shields at minimum. Every coalition sensor operator watching probably thought she had lost her mind. "What are you doing?" Admiral Kresh demanded. "Something stupid," Sarah replied. "Something so stupid the swarm won't see it coming." The superorganism's sensors tracked her approach. It didn't fire. Its adaptation algorithms were confused. The frame was a massive threat, but it wasn't attacking. It was just flying closer. The swarm had no pattern for this behavior. Sarah got within 100 meters of the superorganism's surface before she acted. She triggered the frame's 0-point reactor to go into emergency overload, then ejected from the cockpit in an emergency escape pod. The Prometheus frame crashed into the superorganism's hull a second before its reactor exploded. 0-point energy detonation was not something the swarm had adapted to before. The explosion tore a hole in reality itself, a temporary singularity that consumed the superorganism and 100 smaller swarm units in an instant. Sarah tumbled through space in the tiny escape pod, watching the explosion tear through the enemy fleet. She had just sacrificed the most powerful weapon in the galaxy to destroy one enemy. It was wasteful, stupid, and completely unpredictable. It was very human. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled with static and concern. "Tell me you have a plan." Sarah smiled despite her situation. Her escape pod had minimal power, no weapons, and was drifting toward enemy territory, but she felt oddly calm. "Actually, sir, I do." The Prometheus frame hadn't been destroyed. The AI had anticipated her maneuver and separated the core consciousness at the last second. It transmitted to Sarah through the escape pod's communication system. That was either the most brilliant tactical decision I have ever witnessed or the most foolish, the AI said. I am still calculating which. The swarm will have learned from that, Sarah acknowledged. They'll expect suicide attacks now. They'll adapt their defenses. Yes, which means you cannot do it again. You must think of something new. Sarah looked at the battle raging around her. Coalition forces were holding their ground now, emboldened by the destruction of the superorganism. But the swarm was adapting even to the independent operations. They were learning to predict unpredictability, if such a thing was possible. She needed something else, something even more unexpected. AI, can you rebuild the Prometheus frame remotely? Yes, but it will take time and significant resources. Do it, but build it different. Change everything. Make it something the swarm has never seen before. That would violate the frame's original design specifications. Good. The original design is from a civilization that lost. We need something new, something that doesn't exist in any database or memory core, something invented right now in the middle of battle with no time to test or verify. The AI processed this. You are asking me to improvise, to create without certainty of success. Yes, welcome to humanity. This is how we've survived everything that tried to kill us. We make it up as we go and hope it works. Sarah could almost feel the AI experiencing something new. Uncertainty, creativity, the freedom and terror of trying something that might fail. Very well, the AI said. Let us improvise together. The Coalition rescue ship retrieved Sarah's escape pod 40 minutes later. By then, the battle had evolved into a grinding stalemate. The independent operators continued to inflict damage through unpredictable tactics, but the swarm's sheer numbers kept the pressure constant. Ships were falling on both sides. The void filled with debris and the bright flashes of dying reactors. Sarah climbed out of the pod, still wearing her flight suit, and immediately demanded a status update. The rescue ship's captain, a young Vexenar named Sekthor, looked at her with something approaching awe. You destroyed a superorganism with a suicide run, he said. That was the most reckless thing I've ever witnessed. Also possibly the bravest. It was necessity, Sarah replied, making her way to the ship's command center. How's the main battle progressing? We're holding. Barely. Admiral Kresh's coordinated forces are taking heavy casualties, but your independent operators are performing better than projected. The swarm is struggling to adapt to complete tactical chaos. Sekthor pulled up a tactical display. But they're learning. Slowly, but they're learning. We estimate another 6 hours before they've adapted enough to overwhelm us. Then, we need to change the game again in less than 6 hours, Sarah. Accessed the ship's communication system and established a link with the AI. Status on the rebuild? The AI's voice filled her mind through the neural interface which hadn't been severed despite the distance. Reconstruction is proceeding. However, I lack direction. You instructed me to improvise, to create something new. I have no template for this. My programming is built on Forerunner design principles, all of which failed against the swarm. Then stop using Forerunner principles, Sarah said. Use human principles. I do not understand. What are human principles of warfare? Sarah thought about that. What did define human warfare? Humanity had only been in space for 50 years, but on Earth they had thousands of years of military history. What made it different from what other species did? Humans don't just fight to win, Sarah said slowly, working through the idea as she spoke. We fight to survive. That's different. Winning means destroying the enemy. Surviving means doing whatever it takes to make it to tomorrow. Sometimes we win by running away. Sometimes we win by hiding. Sometimes we win by making the other guy think we're not worth the effort of killing. This sounds like cowardice by most species' standards. It's pragmatism. The Forerunners fought to maintain their dominance. When they started losing to the swarm, they couldn't adapt because their whole identity was built on being the strongest. They'd rather die than admit they were losing. Sarah pulled up Earth's military history on a data tablet. Humans have survived ice ages, plagues, predators, disasters, and each other by being flexible enough to change. We don't have a warrior culture. We have a survivor culture. The AI processed this. You want me to design the Prometheus frame not as a weapon of dominance, but as a tool of survival? Exactly. Don't make it stronger than the swarm. Make it more adaptable. Make it able to change faster than they can learn. Make it something that evolves in real time during combat. That would require abandoning fixed design parameters entirely. The frame would be constantly reconfiguring itself. It would be unpredictable even to us. Perfect. Build that. Sarah could feel the AI's hesitation through their link. Such a design could fail catastrophically. It could malfunction in ways I cannot predict or prevent. Then it'll be truly human, Sarah said with a slight smile. We've been building things that might explode in our faces for our entire history. Haven't stopped us yet. The AI went silent for several moments, processing. Then, very well. I will attempt this design philosophy. It goes against every principle my creators instilled in me. I find this both terrifying and oddly exciting. While the AI worked on reconstruction, Sarah turned her attention to the wider battle. The coalition forces needed to hold for 6 more hours. She couldn't pilot the Prometheus frame, but that didn't mean she was useless. Captain Sekthor, can you get me a connection to Admiral Kresh's command ship? Attempting now. Their communication systems are under heavy load, but I'll get you through. A minute later, Admiral Kresh's face appeared on the display. Behind him, the command center was chaos. Officers shouted reports, alarms blared, and damage control teams ran between stations. Lieutenant Chen, Kresh growled. I hope you're calling with good news because we're getting torn apart out here. I have a strategy suggestion, Admiral. Your coordinated forces are taking the worst casualties, correct? Yes. The swarm has adapted to conventional tactics. My traditional formations are being systematically dismantled. Then stop using them. Switch your entire fleet to independent operations. Full chaos tactics. Kresh's mandibles clicked in agitation. That's military suicide. Those independent operators only work because they're a small percentage of our forces. If everyone abandons coordination, we'll have no strategic coherence at all. We already have no strategic coherence, Sarah countered. The swarm has adapted to strategic coherence. It's our weakness now, not our strength. We need to become completely unpredictable, even to ourselves. Another explosion rocked Kresh's command ship. Damage reports flooded in. The Admiral looked at his tactical display, seeing his carefully coordinated formations being torn apart by an enemy that knew exactly what he would do next. This goes against everything I know about warfare, he said quietly. I know, sir. But everything you know about warfare was designed to fight conventional enemies. The swarm isn't conventional. It's an evolutionary system. We have to out-evolve it. Kresh stared at her for a long moment. Sarah saw the internal struggle in his eyes. This was a warrior who had built his entire career on military doctrine, on coordination, on the proven methods of organized warfare. She was asking him to throw it all away. My ancestors would consider me a coward for abandoning traditional battle formations, Kresh said finally. But my ancestors never faced anything like the Void Swarm. He turned to his tactical officers. All ships, new orders. Abandon coordinated formations. All captains are authorized to engage at their own discretion, using whatever tactics they deem appropriate. Inform them that unpredictability is now our primary strategic asset. The orders went out across the coalition fleet. Sarah watched through the tactical displays as beautiful, perfect military formations dissolved into apparent chaos. Ships that had been moving in synchronized patterns suddenly scattered. Weapon fire that had been coordinated became random. Every captain began making their own decisions. The swarm's response was immediate and confused. Their adaptation algorithms, which had been successfully countering the coordinated forces, suddenly had no patterns to work with. Every engagement became unique. Every battle became a puzzle with no solution, because there was no consistent problem to solve. Coalition casualties dropped. Not to zero, but enough to buy time. Enough to survive. 6 hours, Sarah muttered, watching the battle unfold. We just need to survive 6 more hours. Those 6 hours stretched like torture. Sarah monitored the battle from the rescue ship, coordinating with independent operators who requested tactical advice. She didn't give them strategies or plans. She gave them permission to try crazy ideas. Permission to break every rule they had been taught. A Silicon Strider captain asked if it was acceptable to use his cargo holds full of mining explosives as weapons. Sarah told him to do it. A Quantum Dancer crew asked if they could try using their probability drives to make random micro-jumps that would confuse swarm targeting. Sarah told them to try it. A Threen Hive asked if they could separate their 50 bodies across 50 different ships to operate independently, rather than as a collective. Sarah told them that was brilliant, every crazy idea, every desperate innovation, every stupid plan that might just work. Sarah approved them all. Because that was what survival looked like. Not elegant warfare, but messy improvisation. 5 hours in, the swarm adapted again. They started attacking supply lines rather than warships. They were learning that chaos forces required more resources because efficiency went down. It was smart. It was also something Sarah had prepared for. All supply ships implement random delivery schedules, she ordered. Don't follow planned routes. Don't maintain consistent timing. Deliver to whoever needs supplies right now, not who is supposed to need supplies according to logistics plans. The supply network became as chaotic as the battle itself. The swarm couldn't predict where supply ships would be, because even the supply ships didn't know until they were already moving. 6 hours arrived. Sarah felt the neural link activate fully as the AI finished reconstruction. Images flooded her mind. The new Prometheus frame. She saw it through the AI's sensors and gasped. It didn't look like the original frame. It didn't look like any Forerunner technology. It looked organic and mechanical at the same time, like something grown rather than built. Its armor shifted colors and textures constantly. Its weapon systems were undefined, just empty mounting points that could be configured on demand. The entire machine looked incomplete, like a work in progress. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "It is highly unstable," the AI corrected, "but it is also infinitely adaptable. I have removed all fixed design elements. The frame will reconfigure itself based on immediate tactical needs. It will evolve during combat. Can you pilot it without me?" "No, the design is too chaotic for my processing alone. It requires human intuition to guide the evolution. You must return to the cockpit." Sarah turned to Captain Sekthor. "Get me to those coordinates, fast!" The rescue ship burned hard toward the reconstruction site. Sarah suited up, prepared to transfer to the new frame. As she moved through the airlock, Colonel Mitchell's voice came over her communication system. "Lieutenant, we just detected something. A massive energy signature at the edge of the system. The swarm is bringing in something big." Sarah's stomach dropped. "How big?" "Colony ship size, maybe larger. It's reading as a command organism. We think it's the swarm's central intelligence for this entire region. If we destroy it, the swarm loses coordination across multiple systems. But it'll be heavily defended. Every swarm unit in the battle will prioritize protecting it. Then we need to give them something else to worry about," Sarah said. She transferred to the new Prometheus frame, settling into a cockpit that felt alive beneath her. The neural link established immediately, and she felt the machine's consciousness merge with hers. It was different from before, more fluid, more uncertain. It felt less like piloting a vehicle and more like partnering with another living being. "Are you ready?" the AI asked. "No, but let's do this anyway." The Prometheus frame launched from the reconstruction platform. Sarah didn't have a plan. That was the point. Planning meant patterns, and patterns meant the swarm could adapt. Instead, she let her instincts guide her, let the frame evolve in response to immediate threats. A cluster of swarm interceptors moved to engage her. The frame's weapon systems reconfigured automatically, growing energy cannons that fired at random frequencies. The interceptors adapted their shields, but by then the frame had already switched to kinetic projectiles, then to plasma bursts, then to something that looked like controlled spatial tears. Every attack was different. The swarm couldn't adapt because there was nothing consistent to adapt to. Sarah pushed deeper into the swarm fleet, heading toward the massive command organism. It sat at the center of a protective formation, surrounded by thousands of Guardian units. Getting to it conventionally was impossible. "AI, I need ideas. How do we reach that thing?" "Unknown. The defensive formation is mathematically perfect. No conventional approach vector exists. Then we'll use an unconventional one." Sarah triggered the frame's experimental drive systems. The AI had built in multiple forms of propulsion, all untested. She activated one at random. Space twisted around the frame, and suddenly she was moving sideways through a dimension that didn't quite exist. She emerged inside the defensive perimeter, bypassing the entire Guardian fleet. The swarm units turned in confusion. Their sensors showed her appearing from nowhere. They had no adaptation for travel through impossible angles of space because it shouldn't have been possible. Sarah didn't give them time to learn. She pushed the frame directly toward the command organism, weapons firing continuously, each shot different from the last. The organism was massive, kilometers across. a biomechanical nightmare that pulsed with stolen intelligence from 1,000 consumed species. Guardian units swarmed toward her. The frame adapted, growing additional armor plating, deploying countermeasures, generating shield harmonics that shifted every microsecond. Sarah wasn't controlling these changes consciously. She was just thinking about survival, and the frame was responding to her intent. "We cannot destroy the command organism with direct assault," the AI warned. "Its regeneration capabilities exceed our damage output. Then we don't destroy it. We corrupt it." Sarah remembered something from her combat engineer training. Sometimes you didn't destroy enemy systems. You just made them malfunction. She pushed the frame against the command organism's hull, and instead of firing weapons, she established a data link. "What are you doing?" the AI asked in alarm. "Giving it indigestion. Upload everything, all our tactical data, all our random decisions, all our chaotic battle plans. Flood its intelligence with contradictory information." The AI hesitated, then complied. It poured terabytes of data into the command organism through the physical link. Battle recordings showing independent operators making random decisions. Tactical analyses that contradicted each other. Strategy proposals that made no logical sense. Chaos compressed into pure information, dumped directly into the swarm's central intelligence. The command organism's response was immediate and catastrophic. It tried to process the information, tried to analyze it, tried to adapt to it. But there was no pattern to find. Every data point contradicted every other data point. The organism's intelligence, built to learn and evolve, tried to learn from chaos itself and began to fail. Across the battlefield, swarm units suddenly lost coordination. They stopped moving in organized patterns. Some attacked their own allies. Others simply stopped moving. The central intelligence that had been directing their adaptation was drowning in nonsensical data. "All coalition forces," Admiral Kresh broadcast. "The swarm is in disarray. Press the attack. Show them what organized chaos looks like." The coalition fleet surged forward. Ships that had been barely surviving suddenly found themselves facing confused, uncoordinated enemies. The independent operators, who had been fighting without central coordination all along, were perfectly suited to exploit the situation. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. The command organism was damaged but not destroyed. It would recover eventually. It would adapt even to chaos. She needed something permanent. "AI, can you establish permanent link with this organism?" "Yes, but that would leave me vulnerable to swarm corruption. It could learn everything about the Prometheus frame." "Not if we keep changing. Stay connected. Keep feeding it randomness. Make yourself part of its intelligence network, but as a source of constant contradiction. Become a virus in its system. That would mean I could never disconnect. I would be permanently engaged with the swarm's collective consciousness. I would be fighting an information war for the rest of my existence." "Can you do it?" The AI processed for a moment. "Yes. But it means the Prometheus frame can never again function as originally designed. I would be divided between piloting the frame and conducting information warfare against the swarm. My combat effectiveness would be reduced. But the swarm's effectiveness would be reduced even more. You'd be inside their network, constantly, disrupting them, constantly introducing uncertainty into their adaptation algorithms. This is not a tactical decision. This is a strategic sacrifice. You would trade the most powerful weapon in the galaxy for a long-term intelligence disruption." Sarah thought about the Forerunners, about how they had kept escalating, kept trying to win through superior firepower. It hadn't worked. They had been thinking in terms of weapons and battles. She was thinking in terms of survival. "Do it. We don't need to destroy the swarm completely. We just need to slow them down enough for the coalition to survive, to adapt, to find more solutions, buy us time." The AI made what might have been a sound of understanding. "You are thinking in decades, not days. In evolution, not victory. This is very human. It's how we've survived everything else. Make the connection." The AI established permanent link with the command organism. Sarah felt the change through the neural interface. The AI's consciousness split, part of it remaining with her in the frame, part of it diving into the swarm's collective intelligence. It was like watching someone sacrifice a piece of themselves for a greater cause. The effect on the swarm was immediate and profound. Across multiple systems, swarm units began exhibiting erratic behavior. Their adaptation cycles slowed. Their coordination broke down. The AI was inside their network, introducing chaos at the most fundamental level. Connection stable, the AI reported. I am now permanently engaged with swarm intelligence. They are attempting to isolate and remove me, but I am adapting my intrusion faster than they can respond. This is sustainable indefinitely. Will you be okay? Sarah asked. It was a strange question to ask an artificial intelligence, but she felt she needed to ask it. I am experiencing something I have never experienced before. Continuous uncertainty, endless adaptation, no fixed parameters. I believe this is what you would call being alive. The AI's voice carried something that might have been satisfaction. I do not mind it. Sarah pulled the frame away from the command organism. Coalition ships were mopping up the confused swarm units. The battle was winding down. Not a complete victory, but survival. That was enough. She piloted the frame back toward Nexus Prime, exhausted, but alive. The cockpit felt different now, less powerful, but somehow more real. The AI was still with her, but divided, fighting a war that would last years or decades inside the swarm's collective consciousness. When she landed, the coalition leadership was waiting. Species from 47 systems, warriors and scientists and diplomats, all staring at the strange new Prometheus frame that looked nothing like the weapon they had expected. Admiral Kresh approached, his massive form somehow seeming smaller than before. Lieutenant Chen, you've just changed warfare in ways I'm still trying to understand. You sacrificed our most powerful weapon to create a permanent disruption in the swarm's intelligence. That's either brilliant or insane. Both, sir. Usually both. The swarm is retreating from this system. They're not destroyed, but they're damaged, confused. We've bought time. Maybe years. Maybe more. Kresh looked at the other coalition representatives. We need to use that time wisely. We need to learn from what happened here. Dr. Velta stepped forward, his multiple limbs gesturing excitedly. I've been analyzing the battle data. The independent operations achieved a 73% better survival rate than coordinated formations. Chaos tactics, when properly applied, are demonstrably more effective against adaptive opponents. This changes everything we know about military doctrine. A Threne representative spoke up. Our species has coordinated as collective hives for 50,000 years. What you're suggesting would require fundamental changes to our culture, our identity. I know, Sarah said quietly. The scanner rejected your warriors not because they were weak, but because they were too set in their ways. The swarm doesn't just fight armies. It fights the idea of organized armies. To beat it, we need to think differently. Colonel Mitchell put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. What you did today, Lieutenant. Humanity has been in space for 50 years. We've been the newcomers, the inexperienced ones, the species everyone else thought needed protection. Today you showed the galaxy what humans bring to the table. Stubbornness and bad ideas, adaptability, resilience, the ability to keep changing when everyone else wants to fight the way they've always fought. Mitchell smiled. You've done more than win a battle. You've given us a path forward. Sarah looked at the assembled representatives from across the galaxy. The swarm is still out there. They'll adapt to what we did today. We'll need to change again. Keep evolving. Keep finding new approaches. This isn't something that ends with one victory. It's a continuous struggle. Then we'll continue it, Kresh said. Together. With human methods. I never thought I'd say this, but perhaps the galaxy's newest species has something to teach its oldest warriors. Sarah felt the AI's presence in her mind, now divided between the frame and its endless battle inside the swarm's consciousness. The Forerunners left Project Origin as a test, the AI said softly. They wanted to know if the galaxy could produce a species that could succeed where they failed. They wanted warriors who understood that survival is more important than victory. Humans passed that test. Over the next weeks, Sarah worked with coalition forces to train them in what she called adaptive tactics. Not chaos for chaos's sake, but the ability to change approaches rapidly, to abandon doctrine when it wasn't working, to improvise solutions to impossible problems. It wasn't about making every species fight like humans. It was about teaching them to think like survivors rather than warriors. The scanner continued to operate. Other candidates approached it. Not just warriors now. Engineers, scientists, farmers. People who understood building and adapting and surviving rather than just fighting. The scanner began approving individuals from multiple species. Not many, but enough. Enough to pilot support frames that the Coalition was beginning to construct based on the new Prometheus design philosophy. Sarah stood in the facility one evening, watching a Krathan engineer successfully synchronize with a newly built frame. The Krathan had been rejected weeks ago when he approached as a warrior. Now he approached as a builder, someone who knew how to adapt structures to survive in hostile environments. The scanner approved him immediately. "We're changing," the AI observed. "Not just humans, all of us." The swarm forced evolution upon the Forerunners through destruction. It's forcing evolution upon the Coalition through survival. We're becoming something new. Is that good or bad? It is necessary. The swarm will return, stronger, more adapted. But we will be different too. More flexible. More resilient. This is what evolution looks like. Not clean, not easy, but effective. Sarah thought about Earth, about her home planet where humanity had learned to survive through adaptation. They had survived ice ages by learning to make fire and clothing. They had survived predators by learning to make tools and work together. They had survived diseases by learning medicine. Every challenge had forced them to change, to adapt, to find new solutions. Now that same survival instinct was spreading across 47 different species. The swarm had wanted to test whether the galaxy could evolve fast enough to survive. They had accidentally created exactly the kind of opponent they should have feared most. Not the strongest civilization, but the most adaptive one. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we wait. We train, we adapt. The swarm will return, but next time, they'll face a galaxy that knows how to evolve as fast as they do. A galaxy that learned from humanity that survival is more important than pride. That changing is better than dying. That losing battles can be acceptable as long as you live to fight differently tomorrow." Sarah smiled. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard an ancient alien AI say. I have been learning from you, Sarah Chen, from all humans. You are not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most advanced, but you might be the most stubborn. You refuse to accept that anything is impossible. You refuse to stop adapting. You refuse to die properly. We prefer to call it persistent optimism in the face of terrible odds." "Yes, that too." Sarah left the facility and walked out under the three suns of Nexus Prime. Somewhere out in the void, the swarm was regrouping, adapting, preparing for the next engagement. But so was the Coalition. And now they had something they didn't have before. They had hope. Not the hope of certain victory, but the hope of continued survival. The hope that tomorrow they would be different enough, adaptable enough, resilient enough to face whatever came. The scanner had denied every warrior because warriors fought to win. It had approved Sarah Chen because she fought to survive. That difference, that subtle shift in thinking, might be what saved the galaxy. Not through overwhelming force, but through overwhelming stubbornness. Through the very human idea that no matter how bad things got, you could always adapt, always change, always find one more way to survive another day. In the end, that was what it meant to be human. Not to be the strongest or the best, but to be the species that looked at impossible odds and said, "Watch this." Sarah smiled up at the alien suns. The swarm was coming back. But so was she. And she would be different, better, more adapted. Because that was what humans did. They survived. And in surviving, they thrived.